Relax and take notes while I take totes of the marijuana smoke. Throw you in a choke, gun smoke, gun smoke. Biggie Smalls for mayor, the rap slayer, the hooker layer. Motherfucker, say your prayers. Hail Mary, full of grace. Smack the bitch in the face, take her Gucci bag and a North Face off her back. Jab her if she act funny with the money. Oh, you got me mistaken, honey. I don't wanna rape ya, I just want the paper, the visa, the pisha. I'm out like the vapors. Who's the one?
The 330-pound inmate had been waiting by the phone booths for 40 minutes. Everyone in that block knew why. Nobody warned Rocky Balboa. What happened in the next 30 seconds would empty that entire corridor faster than any prison alarm ever had. This is the story nobody inside Millhaven Prison talked about out loud, but every single inmate remembered exactly where they were standing when it happened. If you are new here, subscribe right now. We drop these stories every single day, and you do not want to miss what comes next. It was a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of February, the kind of afternoon inside Millhaven Prison where the cold came through the walls and the fluorescent lights buzzed just loud enough to get inside your head. Most inmates were finishing up the last hour before evening count. Some were in the yard, some were back in their cells, and a handful were lined up near the phone booths at the end of Block B, waiting for their turn to make a call. Rocky Balboa had been at Millhaven for 7 months by that point. 7 months of keeping his head down, learning the layout, figuring out who ran what, and where the invisible lines were drawn. He was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. He never had been. But trouble had a way of finding him regardless, because trouble always finds the man that other men cannot figure out. And nobody inside Millhaven could quite figure out Rocky Balboa. He was not the biggest man in the facility. He was not the loudest. He did not walk around with a crew behind him or demand respect from the moment he entered a room. He just moved through the prison like a man who had already made peace with where he was, and that bothered people more than anything else could have. Because a man who is not afraid cannot be controlled, and inside a place like Millhaven, control was everything. Marcus Dean had been inside Millhaven for 6 years. He stood 6 feet and 4 inches tall and weighed 330 pounds, and every single one of those pounds was the result of 6 years spent doing nothing but eating, sleeping, and lifting in the prison weight yard. His arms were the size of most men's legs. His shoulders barely fit through a standard doorway. When Marcus Dean walked down a corridor, other inmates moved to the walls without being asked. That was just how it was. That was how it had been for years. Marcus had heard about Rocky Balboa before Rocky ever set foot in Millhaven. Word traveled fast inside the system, and the word on Rocky was that he was tough, stubborn, and impossible to intimidate. That last part was what bothered Marcus the most, because intimidation was the foundation of everything Marcus had built inside those walls. His reputation, his status, his ability to move freely through the facility without anyone questioning him, all of it rested on the simple fact that every inmate in Millhaven believed that crossing Marcus Dean was the worst decision a man could make. And then Rocky Balboa arrived, and within 3 weeks, Marcus could see it. The way Rocky looked at him when they passed in the corridor. Not aggressive, not challenging, just completely unbothered. Like Marcus was simply another man in an orange jumpsuit. Like the 6 feet 4 inches and 330 pounds meant exactly nothing. That was not something Marcus could allow to continue. He started planning it 2 weeks before it happened. He chose the phone booths deliberately. The corridor that led to the phone booths at the end of Block B was the narrowest in the entire facility. There was no way around it. If you wanted to make a call, you walked through that corridor. And on Wednesday afternoons, Rocky always made a call. Same time every week without exception. Marcus told his people to stay back. He did not want witnesses who could be questioned later. He wanted the corridor as empty as possible. Just him and Rocky, and whatever happened next, He arrived 40 minutes early and stood at the far end of the corridor with his arms crossed and his back against the wall, and he waited. Inmates who walked past the corridor entrance that afternoon saw Marcus standing there and immediately turned around. Nobody said a word. Nobody sent a warning. That was not how things worked inside Millhaven. You did not get involved. You kept your eyes forward and you kept walking. And whatever happened in that corridor was not something you saw. Rocky came around the corner at exactly the time he always did. He walked into the corridor without hesitating, without looking up, his mind already on the call he was about to make. He was 3 steps in before he registered that the corridor was empty except for one man at the far end. He stopped. Marcus did not move. He just stared. Rocky looked at him for a long moment. Then he started walking again, steady and unhurried, like a man who had decided something and was not going back on it. Marcus pushed off the wall when Rocky was about 10 feet away. He uncrossed his arms and spread his feet and made himself as wide as the corridor would allow. The message was clear. This ends here. Rocky stopped again. He looked up at Marcus without any change in his expression. He said nothing. Marcus spoke first. He told Rocky that this was his block, that it had been his block for 6 years, and that Rocky was going to start showing that fact the proper respect. He told Rocky that every man inside Millhaven understood how things worked, and the time had come for Rocky to understand it too. Rocky was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply that he was trying to make a phone call. Marcus laughed, but the laugh did not last long, because Rocky was already moving forward again, closing the distance between them like the conversation was over. Marcus reached out and put one hand flat against Rocky's chest to stop him. That was the moment everything changed. What happened next was over before the 2 inmates at the corridor entrance had time to fully process what they were seeing. There was no long exchange. There was no dramatic buildup. Rocky Balboa had spent a lifetime learning how to end things quickly, and he ended this one the same way he had ended every fight that had ever been forced on him, with absolute precision and nothing more than was necessary. One combination, 2 seconds, and 330 pounds of muscle hit the floor of that corridor like something that had been switched off at the source. Rocky stood over Marcus for a moment. He looked down at him with the same unbothered expression he had worn since the day he arrived at Millhaven. Then he stepped around him, walked to the phone booths, and made his call. The guards found Marcus Dean on the floor of the corridor 11 minutes later when the evening count rotation brought them through Block B. He was conscious by then, sitting up against the wall with his back straight and his eyes fixed on the middle distance. When they asked him what happened, he told them he slipped. When they pressed him, he said it again. "I slipped." Not one inmate in Millhaven contradicted that story. In the weeks that followed, something shifted inside Millhaven Prison that nobody ever officially acknowledged, but everyone could feel. The corridor near the phone booths in Block B became the quietest stretch of hallway in the entire facility. Not because anything had been said, not because any new rules had been established, but because of what had happened there on a Wednesday afternoon in February, and because of who had been on the floor when the guards arrived. Marcus Dean served out the rest of his time at Millhaven without incident. He lifted weights in the yard every morning the same as before. He ate in the cafeteria at the same table. But something had gone out of the way he carried himself, something that everyone noticed and nobody mentioned. Because that was also how things worked inside Millhaven. Rocky Balboa made his phone call every Wednesday afternoon for the rest of his time in the facility. Same time, same booth, same unhurried walk down that corridor. Nobody ever stood in his way again. Not because they feared what he would do, but because they had all seen, one way or another, what happened when a man who had spent his entire life being underestimated finally stopped explaining himself and simply showed you the truth. That is what Millhaven remembered about Rocky Balboa long after he was gone. Not the fight, not the corridor, but the phone call he made right after, calm as a man who had just finished something ordinary, because to him, it was. If this story kept you watching until the end, then you already know what this channel is about. Every single day we bring you the moments that never made the headlines, the confrontations that happened in corridors and yards and cafeterias, where the only witnesses were men who knew better than to talk. Rocky Balboa stories that the world never got to see. Hit that subscribe button right now and make sure the bell notification is turned on, because we drop a new story every single day and we are just getting started. If you watched this far, the next one was made for you. We will see you there.